Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 141 of the podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and in this episode, I talk with my friend Will Hutcherson, and Will has been on the podcast before. In fact, we talked about partnering with parents, and I myself actually just went back and downloaded the parent survey that he shared in that episode because we're creating a new parent survey to use in our church. But this time we're talking about something totally different. A lot has changed in Will's life, including his job. And one of the big things he's focused on now is bringing hope to students who are dealing with depression, anxiety, despair, and even suicide. And he's wanting to get this message out about how to help students who are in despair, in depression, have anxiety before, anything like suicide comes up. And he's doing a great work speaking in schools and assemblies, teaching parents and educators and leaders in churches just like us. And so you'll love hearing kind of Will's story, the journey he's on, what he's learning, the experts he's gathering to gain even more information and knowledge about this, to pass that on to folks like you and me so that we can do the best job we possibly can, bringing hope to students in these situations. So you're going to love this interview for sure. Before we jump into that, I want to let you know that if you want to train your volunteers online like we do, and that's something we've been integrating more and more over the years. Maybe you don't use any online methods to train your volunteers. It's all just in person or whatever. My preference is to have a variety, like, training that happens in person, training that happens in bigger groups. If you gather your teams once or twice a year and you're doing that kind of training, onboarding, apprenticing. But I also like for there to be an online component, something that people can consume in their own time, kind of on demand. It's already been created. It's there. It's ready. And for us, we use Trained Up for that. It's a platform where you can train your volunteers online. And with Ministry Boost and our partnership with Trained Up, you can get 10% off of your Trained Up subscription for life. Just go to ministryboost.org/trained up. And then if you sign up for Trained Up, use the code BOOST10, BOOST10 to get 10% off for life. And here soon, I'm going to let you know about a free course that you can even take with us that just kind of helps you learn how to use Trained Up and train your volunteers online. And that'll be coming soon. So keep an eye out for that. And let's go ahead now and jump into my interview with Will. Well, it's good to have my friend Will Hutcherson back on the podcast. Welcome back, Will.
Thank you.
So a lot has changed since you were last on, over a year ago, I'm sure. And so for anyone who didn't hear that one or isn't familiar with you, introduce us to yourself, but then also tell us, what's new, what's going on, what's changed.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Nick. The last time I was here, I was the executive Next Gen pastor at a church that I was serving for over 10 years. And last year, really last 2 years, have been feeling this stirring to kind of step out into a different role. And specifically, maybe the best way to put it is kind of an evangelism role. In some ways, I feel like I'm a missionary to public schools. So engaging public schools in a new way. And last year, we started a nonprofit called Youth Leadership Collective. And the whole purpose, the whole goal is to help educators and help parents specifically with healing despair in teenagers, because I know all of us know this. Despair is on the rise. Suicide is on the rise. And we got to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the last time we talked, when you were in that role, we talked about partnering with parents. And I know a lot of people love that interview, and so people should go back and listen if they haven't heard that. You even shared, I think, a survey that I've given out to a couple other people when they asked me about parent survey. And then what we're going to talk about today is what you just said. And it's going to be helpful for parents. It's going to be helpful for church leaders. I know I'm listening with the idea of how can I be thinking about this in my own life and influence with kids and students, my own kids. And of course, my kids are young. But then also, how can we help the parents in our church, fight despair and all that? And I'm sure, like me, a lot of people listening understand some of the landscape and what students are struggling with and what's going on there, but help us get a better understanding of exactly what that is and maybe how things have changed even in the last couple decades.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, even as a parent myself, I have my oldest is 8 years old, going to turn 9 here soon. And, we've heard stories of, kids who have been 8, 9 years old attempting suicide or, feeling that deep despair. And so I think, I don't feel exactly what a parent of a preteen or a teenager feels quite yet when their kid faces despair, but I can relate a little bit. I think parents in general, we kind of feel this helplessness, against this invisible enemy. We're seeing this rise and, it kind of scares the daylights out of us. A lot of parents are thinking like, am I missing something? Am I doing everything right? The trends that are taking place right now, we see some good trends. Statistics are showing us that teenagers are less likely to engage in at-risk behaviors. So the things that we used to do, like, drive really fast down the road and binge drinking or drugs. And by we, I mean like our age group in the 90s and even early 80s.
Even before that probably too. Like I think about my dad's stories. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. So all of those at-risk behaviors are actually trending down. And the reason why is because teenagers are more comfortable in their bedroom than they are in a car or at a party. And so drug and alcohol abuse is down, believe it or not. And the number of sexually active teens is down 40% since 1991. So youth pastors, next gen pastors of the past, we were focusing in the 90s on, drug and alcohol abuse. We were focusing on abstinence and, now it's kind of shifted to sexual integrity, which is important. But, that was a lot of our focus, but now, not to say that those things don't exist because they do, but those things are trending down. But the one thing that's trending up is despair. The number of teens who get together daily with friends dropped 40% since 2000. Which that one just kind of blows my mind because I think about, my teenage years and I'm like, man, I got together daily with my friends. Like we were hanging out every day after school, going places, we were going to Burger King and hanging out, or we were going to the mall or going to the movie theater on Friday nights or Saturday nights. But physical places have been replaced by virtual spaces in many ways. Mm-hmm. So teenagers, young adults are connecting in ways that are just, a lot different from even 15 years ago. I have one of my students who is in my youth group just recently got married. He's now, just graduated UF and is heading off to, serve in the Air Force. Well, he got married and I got to officiate the wedding. And this was just a month ago. And he introduced me to two guys who live in North Carolina that he invited to his wedding that are friends of his that he's known for the last 2 years on Xbox Live. And his wedding was the first time that they had actually gotten together face to face.
Oh man. It's like totally understandable in today, but still a little bit interesting.
Yeah. Like he felt that comfortable and close to those guys to actually invite him to his wedding, which was actually pretty small. So, I mean, these guys had to be pretty significant in his life. And he had actually never met these guys face to face until his wedding. And I thought that is a different context, from what we think in terms of relationship and how relationships are formed. I'm not sure I would have ever done that. I'm not sure my brain is wired that way.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. There's not a difference between knowing you in the real world, so to speak, and knowing you through the virtual world. But that probably just adds to some of the stuff you're talking about, the disconnection. Like like you're saying, I just played with kids, friends that lived on the same street as me every day. You know what I mean? Every day.
Yeah.
And so the idea that, but it makes total sense that that's happening less now because they're engaging more in, technology and less in, with real people. And in terms of things on the rise, would you say depression, anxiety, suicide, that's all right on the rise?
Absolutely. Depression.
Are on the decline?
All of those things are on the rise. And because of this digital revolution, we're not connecting as people anymore. Conversations aren't connecting like they used to face, other than like video conferencing, which is probably the best way to connect with somebody in the digital space, because at least you can see facial expressions. Mm-hmm. At least with audio, you can hear vocal inflectuation and tone. But, aside from those things, a lot of our connection as humans is lost. Even appropriate physical touch is lost. And just the in-between spaces, like in-between conversations that you used to have when you're just hanging out in a living room, that kind of shapes who you are and it shapes your relationships. All of that is getting lost. And I think what that does is it makes teenagers feel very connected, but really lonely. And some of the trends and the statistics show us that 8th graders who spend 6 to 9 hours per week on screens. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot to me. Like when I think about even,
sure, yeah.
Parents who say, well, they got 1 hour a day. Well, okay, if that really happens 1 hour a day, then they're at 7 at least. But 8th graders who spend 6 to 9 hours per week on screens are 47% more likely to say that they are unhappy than those who use it less. And those who have an above average of time with friends in person are 20% less likely to say that they're unhappy. So there's these really crazy trends that we're seeing where people who use screens less, teenagers specifically, are more likely to say that they're happy, and people who are face to face are more likely to say that they're happy. And I think because of the negative consequences that come with social media specifically, and just the lack of connection. So there is a rise in despair, and the suicides or the statistics that probably scare us the most are the suicide statistics. Suicide rates have doubled in teen boys since 2007, and they're up 33% in teen girls.
Which is
that's
probably a short time. That's a short time for a double.
Short time.
Yeah.
And that probably bothers me more than anything else. Like that concerns me. Because we're in this and we do what we do to lead kids to life, right? To everlasting life, to Jesus. We're doing what we're doing to give them the greatest hope in all the world. But here they are, like in these deep pits of despair and feeling like there's no hope for tomorrow. And they're making permanent decisions on temporary pressures. And honestly, I mean, I think the thing that concerns me as a pastor is I'm like, well, if they're not breathing, then I can't reach them, like if they're not physically able to walk into my church, then I've lost the opportunity and we've missed an opportunity to share the gospel. And so we got to change this. We have to do what we can to help parents and educators who are kind of that first line of defense on how they can heal despair so that we can continue to influence the next generation and lead them to the greatest hope that we know of, which is Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And that's why this statistic, I think, bothers me so much. And because we got to keep them breathing.
Talk about, so you talk about despair, and in all your research and experience and everything, like that's the best way to talk about where they are versus depression. So tell us like the difference between the two. I think a lot of us know about connections between depression and suicide, but tell us the difference there with despair specifically and why that's kind of the word.
That's great. Yeah, great question. And, a lot of people think that depression is what causes suicide, but the reality is depression doesn't cause suicide. Depression may contribute to suicide, but depression alone isn't the number one factor in whether or not somebody's going to attempt or commit, suicide. Despair is what every single one of them feels, though. That is the issue. There are other things that could contribute to suicide. For instance, other mental health issues, not just depression, bipolarism, schizophrenia, deep despair or loss of, family income may kind of send them into a place of despair. But of the people who commit suicides, only 50% are diagnosed with a mental health issue like depression. So you have another 50%. And it could be said, it could be argued, well, the other 50% just weren't diagnosed. But some psychiatrists and psychologists like Mark Golston, has kind of said like, hey, let's not just focus on depression, because if we just focus on depression, we might miss it. The real issue here is despair. And when you think about how the brain kind of works, to simplify this, and I wish, I could visualize this as well, but, just picture as you're listening, there's two sides of your brain. There's a lot of parts of your brain, but for simplistic, sense, you have your right side, which is your emotional side of your brain, and your left side, which is more of your logical side of your brain. In a healthy brain, these pieces are playing together. You're processing healthy emotions, you're logically kind of, working through this, and you have this sense of wholeness. Well, one psychologist put it as like despair is a dispairing, where there's this disconnection that takes place. Another term that psychologists use is emotional detachment. And when despair is on the rise, the fight or flight mechanism of your brain gets really over heightened, starts rushing over to the emotional side, and it creates this barrier, and where the logical side of your brain kind of quote unquote detaches, not physically, but mentally kind of detaches. And someone can feel so much despair that they don't even know how they feel. Like, so this is why when a teenager is feeling despair and someone asks them, well, how do you feel right now? They might say things like, I don't know, I just feel numb. Or, especially in trauma, they'll feel that way. Or someone who is experiencing depression might say they feel like they're experiencing their life outside of themselves, because there's this separation that's taking place. But the coolest part about all the research that I've been able to do, and God's brought together a really cool team with Youth Leadership Collective. We have mental health counselors, we have psychologists, we have researchers from universities and doctors who are all contributing to our content to help equip parents and teachers. And one of the things that research is showing us is that it is possible to heal despair. And so this is the hope, and this is the hope that we're sharing. And this is what I want every ministry leader to understand. It is possible to heal despair. And it's things that we've been doing in the church world, and things that we know intuitively, and things that we know Jesus and the Bible has been telling us. But ultimately, love and genuine acts of love begins to heal despair. Conversations heal despair. Eye contact heals despair. And when we engage with appropriate physical touch, conversation, and eye contact over time, teenagers feel felt. Another psychology word for this is the psychology of attunement, and it brings the two halves together. It reconnects the emotional with the logical, and they're able to start processing through what they're feeling, and that begins to heal the brain, and despair begins to lower. And through human connection, we can actually see the brain come back down to a neutral place, kind of this wholeness, if you will, this kind of soul wholeness, and it actually heals despair and puts students at a better place. So that's probably the coolest news of all of this. Neuroscience is proving what we've known for a while as people who study and read scripture and know Jesus. Science is kind of confirming that hey, actually the brain is wired that way. God made our brains to be able to heal with human connection.
And we all need connection. I guess that's the other part of it too, is like there's this deep need for connection and relationship, to be known, to belong, to be loved and cared for. And so that's why all the things you mentioned help with that. Now, how, like when you're talking to, and we'll talk a little bit about like all you're doing to try to bring hope in this area. But before we jump into that, practically, when you're talking to parents or church leaders that are going to equip parents, how do you take those things? And it seems obvious, like, okay, well, then I need to have good connection time with my kids. I need to listen, make eye contact, show love, get other people right in their life surrounding them. So I'm not doing that alone. But what do you say to them? Like, especially if a parent was genuinely, like when I've heard you talk about this, I think about it all the time. In fact, since I've heard you say this recently, I pay more attention to the eye contact I have with my kids who are young, 6 and under, because I think about that. I think about, let me make sure this feels like real connection now because I am paying attention. But what if I look over here? You know what I mean? And so anyway, I think about that. But like practically, what do you tell parents to do, or even leaders that are in the lives of students to help apply this? Because it's not like we have one good conversation, your despair's gone now. You know what I mean, or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you tell them to help students with this?
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's easy as a parent to just kind of get caught up in all the things that we have to do as parents. It's like we got, schedules to maintain, we got houses to clean and food to cook, and then, cars will break down and we got cars to fix, And so in the chaos of life, we can kind of miss connection. And honestly, I think the principle of connection is simple to your point. And everything that we're talking about is really simple principles. But what parents need is just a way to apply this in their life. Like, okay, I need to spend more time, if you will, with my kid. Give me a practical way to do that. Like help it make sense for me. I need to connect with my kid. Well, eye contact is actually one of those practical things. Like, here's something you could apply today. Having a no phone zone is another thing that I tell parents, like just having a space, like creating boundaries, around technology. I think about my little girl who is now 6, but when she was 4, a couple of years ago, I was on my phone. I think I was trying to buy something on Amazon that I didn't need. And, like we all do, right?
Yeah.
And she comes up to me and, she goes, "Dad." And I go, yeah, Reese. But I didn't look at her. I just kept looking at my phone. And she goes, "Dad." I go, "Yeah, Reese." And she goes, "Daddy." And I go, "Reese, yeah, what?" And I just kept on looking at my phone. Finally, she grabs my chin and pulls my face over to her face. And she says, "Look at me," And it was so aggressive for, a little 4-year-old that I didn't expect it, but what she did in that moment is she kind of knocked me out of my zone of being on my phone, and she made me look at her. And the point was, and what I kind of took from that exchange was she needed me to see her. It wasn't just hear her. She needed me to see her. Like, she needed in that moment to know that whatever she wanted to communicate to me wasn't just like heard, but it was felt, it was seen, like there was a connection. And, I just think it's funny, we kind of get on our kids about how much time they're spending on screens and video games and phones or things even that we don't understand, like we'll be like, "I don't understand why you like that Fortnite so much," or, "I don't understand why you have to be on that Xbox Live as much as you do." But the reality is if we're really honest as adults, we're not really any better at times. And maybe our technology use is more justified in our minds because it's, I have to order things on Amazon, or, yeah, but I'm actually doing work, quote unquote. But the reality is we can slip into similar patterns. And so, just letting parents know that as well, like, hey, this starts with you. This starts with your own stress levels and caring for you and watching your anxiety and watching how much time you're spending on screens, because all of that matters. And the way that I kind of explain this, and I have a teaching that I do for parents and educators and youth leaders, and I take the psychology of attunement. So ATTUNE and then meant. And I really take that first part, that attune, and I break it off into an acronym. Like, here's how you can attune to your kid. I call them attunement tools. And the first one, the A, is to attend. And this is what we teach our small group leaders, honestly, like be present mentally, physically, and emotionally, like be present, show up randomly even. But more than that, when I'm talking with a parent, I'll use this opportunity to let them know, like, hey, this is what you should look for. Like, if your kid is slipping into a more chronic level of despair, which would be kind of depression and showing like depression symptoms, whether that's mild or more severe, kind of looking out for the signs of that. The feeling sad, feeling hopeless, when their despair starts to show physically, it's going to be more lethargy, feeling like worthlessness or not good enough. Now, again, I mean, I think the teenage brain, like you could say, like they have their ups and downs. And so you might have these moments where, all of a sudden your kid's saying, I'm just not good enough. Even my 8-year-old, sometimes he'll go on emotional. He's very emotional, and he'll be like, nobody cares. and
yeah.
So you got to watch those things and understand, not every statement from them means that, they're in a deep depression or a deep despair, but just keeping an eye out for those things. And whenever those things start to pop up, just be a little bit more intentional with conversation, with time spent. I really believe parents have a superpower, and their superpower is they have probably more than anybody else the ability to heal despair in their kids, because what's been deposited in their little hearts at a young age is this attachment with their parents, and they can't get away from that. And when a parent reattunes with their kid and connects with them on a deep spiritual heart level, it takes those kids back to that early attachment zone of their brains, and kind of regrooves back to a place of safety, back to a place of warmth and love. And that can really bring a sense of peace. And so parents have an ability probably better than anyone else. Doesn't mean that educators can't do that or small group leaders can't do that, because they can. But parents, I just think, have an advantage in that regard. So paying attention to those signs and then taking action. If a parent has a hunch, that their kid may be thinking about killing themselves or struggling with suicidal thoughts, I tell parents to stay calm. There's really only 3 things you can really say in that moment, which is, I love you, the first thing. The second thing, thank you. Thank you for being brave and trusting me and sharing with me what you're going through. And then the third thing is it okay if we get help together? And I tell parents that because, in that moment, you care so much about your kid. The temptation is to start to tell them all the reasons why they shouldn't feel the way they feel, right? Yeah. Well, you shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't feel upset, and we start to give them silver linings, or we start to try to help them to refrain with logical processing. But if your kid is like emotionally heightened with that fight or flight, and they're just feeling this despair, this ongoing despair, the logical processing in that moment doesn't really work. And so the only thing that really works is presence. I think about, as pastors, we know this, when something happens, like there's a death in someone's family, we'll just show up, right? I've often heard that called the ministry of presence. Like we just show up. And in some ways, like when your kid's facing despair, you just got to show up. You just got to be there. One story that I always admired is this dad, who a very successful CEO, has a 16-year-old son, and finally had a conversation with his son and just listened to his son, and his son just unloaded all these things about what he's feeling. And the dad said, like, why didn't you tell me sooner? And the son said, I did. You just didn't want to listen. And what the dad did in that moment, though, was he didn't try to fix his son. He said, well, you know what? You shouldn't be alone if this is the way you're feeling. And so he went and he got his computer. He sat in his room, and while his son was doing homework, he did his own work, and he was just present with his son. And he tried to be present with his son as much as possible. I think of another guy that I know that, is working with somebody who was dealing with, deep depression and was afraid that they were going to hurt themselves or hurt someone else. And in that emotionally heightened crisis, he said, you know what? You don't have to worry about that because I'm going to sleep outside your door tonight. And actually slept outside his bedroom door and just was present. And so if it gets to that place where it is really, really severe and you're kind of in crisis mode, presence matters. And I know it sounds simplified, but really it is human connection that heals the brain of despair. And when we connect with humans, when we connect with one another, something happens in our hearts and our souls and in our minds that begins to heal despair like nothing else can. And so the first one is attend. The second one is time. So just spending more time, I share the kind of the marble principle of, if you have a sixth grader, you have 364 weeks to influence them. If you have an eighth grader, you have 260 weeks to influence them. The problem with this is the average amount of time that parents of teenagers are spending with their kids is like 26 minutes a week, or 26 minutes a day rather. And so when you add that up, that's like 3 hours a week. So it's not really that much.
Yeah.
And so I tell parents like 3 hours a week of quality time with your kid in a very stressful time of life, you just got to fight for more time. You got to fight for quality time. So time's a big factor.
That's good. What else? I was thinking there was a moment there where you weren't going to give us the rest of the letters, and I was like, you got to give us the rest of the letters, man.
I'm going to give you the rest of the letters. The second T is tone, and this is where I talk about self-care for the parents, and this is also good for youth pastors, for kids pastors to understand this as well. If you're super stressed out, your tone is not going to be great. And if you're trying to help somebody who's in crisis or, facing despair, but you yourself are kind of, wide-eyed and your voice is very activated and kind of intense, you're just going to kind of make other people more stressed out, And so tone is very, very important. And so this is where I talk to parents and teachers and youth leaders about caring for themselves, because if you care for yourself and you manage your own stress appropriately, you're going to be able to actually have an appropriate tone and connect and have conversations. This is, really dealing with some of your own fears, some of your own perhaps even beliefs that are, kind of bogging you down. I talk about reflection, journaling. Obviously prayer, spending more time in prayer and just breathing exercises are also really good. There's some great books that I've loved personally and highly recommend. John Ortberg's Soul Keeper is a great book. There's a book by Ruth Burton called An Invitation to Silence and Solitude that I highly recommend. And so just caring for yourself, because if you care for yourself, you're going to have great tone in these moments when your kids are facing despair.
Yeah.
The next one is you. And this is where I talk to parents about unplugging, having those unplugged times, no phone zones, creating boundaries with smartphones. We've had smartphones for 10 years, just over. And so we really don't know completely how to use them appropriately or how to create boundaries. I think about like cars. We've had cars around for, 100 years. So now we've created all these safety mechanisms with cars. We have seat belts now and we have airbags and we have cars that stop on their own and cars that park themselves. And, we have all these safety features to make cars safer. But we've had it for 100 years. Well, we've only had cell phones and smartphones and really all this connectivity and social media. We've only had it for about 10 years. So we don't have any safety features. And really what we've done as a society is we've kind of said, well, use it as much as possible with no boundaries. The problem is what this does to mental health. We're now starting to realize like, wow, there's a deep correlation here with the onset of social media and smartphones and all this connectivity on digital space. There is a correlation in the rise of despair. It's not the only cause of it, but it definitely is a contributor. And so we have to find time to unplug. We have to create boundaries. We have to teach our kids boundaries. And it's okay to be still. It's okay to just write or read or not have a screen constantly in our face. When I tell that to students, they look at me like I'm crazy, but
they probably hear that. Yeah, they probably hear that in other settings too. They're like, "Oh, of course, yeah, tell us to stay off our phones." But how would they know? Like, I wouldn't have known. I don't know if I'd know now. You know what I mean? And like you said, it's 10 to 12 years of smartphones. It's not like we really even know the long-term impact of that on our brains. There's stuff coming out now, but that's still a short time. To like start making correlations or whatever. Yeah.
And the technology companies know it. I mean, there's a reason why Apple started, with their screen time, monitoring. Like, so we're starting to get a little bit more safety features, quote unquote, or, we're starting to be a little bit more mindful. I thought it was really interesting. I read one article that talked about how a lot of the tech CEOs and executives send their kids to schools in the Silicon Valley that actually don't use technology in the school. I thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting.
So they see the value of not having their kids, in front of screens all the time. And so anyways, I think that trend's going to continue. I think we're going to continue to create boundaries with technology. And, really, I think parents can do that now. They can start to just create, even places in the house where maybe it's like, hey, this room is a no screen zone. When we're in this room, we're just talking, we're hanging out, we're having conversations. For me and my family, it's dinner time is one of our popular ones. And we'll kind of do it from dinner time through like 8:30 kind of thing, which is like bedtime for our kids. So it's like we have this period of time in our house where if somebody's on a phone or we turn off the TV and we just hang out. We got this game called Table Talk. And so we put a deck of cards in the middle of the table and we pull, questions. And we don't do this every night. So we're not a weird family that, we're a normal family. But every now and then we grab the Table Talk cards and we'll grab a question and we'll go around the table. And my kids love it. And I know parents that do this and their teenagers roll their eyes every time they do it. But it just creates conversation. And even though they're rolling their eyes, they secretly love it. So you just got to remember that.
Yeah, that's good. What's
the N in the tune? So we have ATTUN, and the N is notice. Notice is looking deeper than just the physical, like just looking beyond what they may be portraying. So the way I like to, kind of illustrate this is you have your kid comes home from school and they're just distraught. They're crying, they're upset. I failed my test. I can't believe I failed my test. And, and as a parent, you say, of course you failed your test. You didn't study when I told you to. I was on you all last night about studying and you did something different. You wouldn't study and blah, blah, blah. And we want to just hit them with logical processing. The problem is we have to notice the moment, right brain with right brain, left brain with left brain. So if they're right brain activated and they're really emotionally just kind of in it, to respond emotionally and then loop back around later with the logical. So that's really kind of noticing the moment. I think of Ron Burgundy, read the room, Ron, read the room. Look at the deeper thing that's taking place. The reason why is because when we meet them with right brain to right brain, it looks a little different. Oh, honey, come over here. Sit down. I'm so sorry. I hate that you failed your test. Let me get you some water. And that's just empathy. That's just connecting with them right where they are. And then later loop back around and say, okay, let's talk about this. How could we do better later? How can we improve? That is really, really effective to connection. So some of the words that I'll give parents to kind of use, like especially if their kid is, they're not sure how they're feeling, but they're trying to notice the emotion, is I'll say, 7 words. One is exhausted, hurt, ashamed, lonely, angry, alone, afraid, like just just put out some of those words and then say, how do you feel? Like, which one of those, if you had to pick one, which one would you choose? And your kid might say, I don't know, I feel all of them. Or, you might say, well, just pick one, and well, fine, I feel angry. Talk about that. And just let them talking about their emotions, again, helps you to notice, but it also helps them to process. And as they talk about it, you're kind of helping them reconnect in a very safe environment, to feel felt. So, and then the last one of attune is eye contact. And this is one you referenced, Nick, of just the power of eye contact. It's another form of human connectivity. When you add eye contact with appropriate physical touch and words of affirmation, like, it is powerful. Like, it is a very powerful act of love, and it really influences the brain in amazing ways. It's cool to read some of the research on the power of eye contact with kids with despair, but also even other issues that people may have. Eye contact is just a really powerful thing. And so just I'll do role play sometimes with parents and kids, and I'll have them look at each other and try to see how long they can maintain eye contact. And so just practicing that, eye contact can really, really help heal the brain. So those are the 5 practical things that I give to teenagers, to parents, on how they can help their teens who are facing despair. And I just try to give them as many practical pieces to it as possible.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So you're doing a lot of work in this area. Obviously, it's all kind of new, but tell us all that you're doing, speaking at assemblies, speaking to parents, church leaders, and tell us about all, like, it's early. So tell us what you're doing, how it's going. And some people maybe want to talk to you more about that. I know you and I were talking earlier about how you're coming up to speak at our high school, and it's our middle school and high school fall retreat. They're kind of 2 different retreats, but you'll be at our high school one, which I'm really excited about. And I was talking to you about how I'm going to see if there's any way we can get some of the schools we're connected with to maybe be interested in you presenting this in like an assembly fashion like you've been doing. So tell us about that and what it's been like so far.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I just had 2 school assemblies this week, and had a fall retreat in Tulsa this week as well. And so I love helping teenagers. The message is really simple in schools. It's hope, it's purpose, it's love. They respond really, really well to that. I'm always surprised at how hungry they are for simple truths in the public schools. They're just really hungry for just positive influences and hope. And so that's going really great. I love partnering with churches and ministry leaders and helping them with camps and conferences and retreats, and any way I can come and lift up their arms. And a few leader trainings as well. Like, we got a small group training next week as well, small group leader training, parent trainings, and just helping make this connection. I mean, our students are probably in more need than ever before. And, we have to get as many adults on board on how to heal despair so that we can kind of change this trend and reduce suicide all across. So yeah, I mean, anyone that would, is looking for a camp speaker, a, fall retreat, spring retreat, winter retreat, I'm always open to helping and participating in that, and also youth groups as well. And a lot of times what we do, like you mentioned, Nick, kind of pairing those together with school assemblies, it's a great way to engage schools. And I know oftentimes as churches, we have a hard time getting into schools. And that's kind of why I started the nonprofit, because I feel like I'm a missionary in a communist country. Like, I've had to create a non-religious nonprofit so that, there's not any religious tones in our website and in our messaging, but that's how we're able to get into the schools and influence students with a message of hope. And then with that, if I'm speaking at, a youth group or a fall retreat, oftentimes a principal will allow us to invite students to a youth event at the end of an assembly, just by saying, like, hey, there's a lot of reasons why we have hope, and one of the main reasons is our faith. We can't talk about that here, but I'm going to be speaking at blah, 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 and that's where I really, talk about my faith. So I'd like to invite you to come and hear more. And so that's one of the methods that we use to kind of just to to share. If the principal doesn't let us do that, then it's just a place where we share hope. But sometimes the principals will let us do that.
Yeah, especially as they build a relationship. And like in our case, I told you I'll be talking with connections we have, like teachers, principals, people that work in central office of schools that go to our church. So they already have, they believe and they have an interest in our church. And so there's like, it's easier than maybe the cold call of like, hey, you should do this for your students. And they really should. But without the relationship, it's hard to convince them that. So yeah, I'm excited to have you in the fall. And I have another idea that I'm going to talk to you about, and so everybody else is just going to have to wonder what it is, and unless we do it and it works, and then I can bring it back and we can tell them how we did it, of how to maybe even continue to get the message out there. So we could talk about that too. And I'm excited, for the work you're doing for when you're going to come in the fall. I'm hoping we can get one or more schools to say, yeah, we'll do an assembly, around when Will's in town to do the fall retreat. So we'll see. That's great. How can people connect with you? Yeah, so willhutch.com is probably the best way to connect. And with that, they can find the Youth Leadership Collective page as well, which is our nonprofit. And yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, on Instagram, I'm on there at Will Hutch, really easy. So pretty much if you just look Will Hutch anywhere, hopefully I'll pop up. You got it. Cool, man. Well, I'm proud of the work you're doing. I love that you stepped out. I don't even know if this is probably even what you envisioned when things were in flux and you were kind of looking for that next step and helping in a couple different ways. And it's really cool to see how fast this is growing because the need is so large and you're starting to meet it this way. So I'm excited for what's ahead and the impact you're going to have on kids' lives. And so thanks for taking time to share with us on the podcast. I know it's early. We'll definitely have to have you come back, and talk about what it's looking like a year or two in or something like that. That'd be great to hear more about it. But thanks for coming on the podcast. Awesome. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. Wow. I love the work that Will is doing. I think there's so much that he's going to do for good to help students, to help parents and leaders and all of us that work with students and parents, certainly, to help bring hope to them so they can get through the despair that they might be facing and depression and anxiety and all of that. And so I'm excited for what's to come with Will as this getting started, and he's gathering these experts and they're just continuing to do work and figure out how to best equip parents and leaders and all of us to provide hope. And I think a few of the action items I think of coming out of this episode, one is just learning more about this. Maybe you can even reach out to Will and see how he can help you with that, but learning about it with your team. Is there a way that with your team, your volunteers, that you can learn about this together, get them equipped with this kind of information so that they can help students? I know one of the things I'm exploring with Will, I kind of mentioned it in our interview, but didn't say exactly what it was, but I don't mind sharing it. I'm talking with Will about the prospect of doing kind of a live webinar that we'll invite our parents to attend, that I'll sort of host, and then Will can be the guest and teach the same content there. And then we might even use some Facebook ads and things like that to get it out there for parents like around our church and our community, but who aren't a part of our church, right? Because if it's an online webinar that's free, anybody can attend, but we'll, target the area around our church and kind of play the host of that webinar. So that way, if parents do watch the webinar, are helped by that content and want to connect, they could certainly come to our church. So that's something we're exploring right now. Haven't done that yet. Would love to follow back and let you know how that goes. And then the third thing I would say is, if you're thinking about, we're having Will speak at our fall retreat for students. And if you think you have a connection with schools in your area, like I know I do, and I've talked to some of the folks in our church who work in schools, I would push and encourage you to consider bringing Will in and speaking to schools. I mean, what better message could you give to high school students than a message of hope in the midst of despair? So some of you, just like our church, might have some connection to schools that way, or maybe you want to bring them in and just talk to students in your ministry. I think that would be a great action step. As usual, you can get the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 141. And as I said in the beginning, if you want to train your volunteers online, certainly Trained Up is a great solution. It's the one we use at our church. Don't forget, you can get 10% off for life with that code BOOST10. Just go to ministryboost.org/trained up. Well, there you go. That's it for this week. Hope this was encouraging. Hope it was helpful. I mean, no doubt the statistics, the stories, the things that we'll talked about is sad. It's disheartening. But there's hope. There's hope, and we can help be that. So I hope in some ways, even though this episode was probably hard, I hope it's also encouraging because of the opportunity you have, the difference that we can make in the lives of students. So thanks for listening, and I hope it makes a difference in the life of someone you know, in your church, in your family, in schools, in your neighborhood. Definitely take this and do something with it in the next few weeks and few months. So thanks again for listening. Hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.